We are introducing all of our guests with a question. What does it mean to be a B Corp in 5 words or less?
You did tip me off to
I
this,
did
Tina.
a little
I'll
bit.
admit it. Yeah. So for us, I think being a B Corp is we do it anyway. We take our mission to heart at Revision. And so we do it even when we're not asked.
Yeah, that's it right there.
That's the 5 words,
Yeah,
right?
That's a really good one, Drew. I was not tipped off to this one. I mean, I think it's just aligning with best practices. Is that lesson 5?
that's 4. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Get Down to Business, a B Corp podcast that takes you inside the B Corp movement one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Lauren Everett. And in this series, we're breaking down what it means to be a certified business, why it matters, and how companies are putting purpose alongside profit. Today's episode is all about environmental impact and sustainability, one of the most crucial aspects of the B Corp certification process. Businesses today are increasingly being held accountable for their environmental footprint, and B Corps are leading the way by measuring, reducing, and mitigating their impact on the planet. We'll explore how businesses can implement sustainable practices, overcome challenges, and create lasting change. Joining me for today's conversation is my co-host and fellow B-Labber, Max Hayes, our business development and growth manager who works closely with businesses navigating the B Corp certification process. Max, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back,
Of
man.
course. And today we are talking with Revision Architecture, an architecture and sustainability consulting practice that has been a certified B Corp since 2007 and is deeply committed to re-envisioning and restoring the balance between natural, built, and social environments. Joining us from Revision Architecture is Drew Lavine, a partner at the firm and an expert in designing net zero energy, passive house, and living building challenge projects. He's also been an integral part of embedding B Corp principles into Revision's culture and operations. Also with us is Shawn Hogan, a project manager at the High Performance Consulting Studio who specializes in fostering collaboration and environmental change within corporate and community spaces. Welcome. It's nice to have you all.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us.
Of course. Let's get into what Revision Architecture does.
We're a small business in Philadelphia. We're very proud of our Philadelphia roots, and we do a couple of things. So yes, we are an architecture firm, as our name says, and so about half of our company is dedicated to green and sustainable architecture, and we do lots of different kinds of architecture. Everything from working on people's homes, and it might be a renovation, addition, new construction. We do multifamily projects. We do all kinds of commercial projects. We work in higher ed. We've dabbled in manufacturing. As an architecture firm, we're unique because we're not stovepiped in a single industry. We work across sectors with sustainability being the thread that connects them. On the other side of the firm, so we have 2 studios. We have our architecture studio, and then we have our high performance consulting studio. And maybe Shawn's the best person to talk about that.
Yeah, so we do a lot of LEED certification. So buildings that are, in design that want to be more sustainable than kind of code minimum. We are the lead consultants on those types of projects. And then we also do other types of, building rating systems, sustainability consulting. So we've had well projects, LVC core, net zero energy, net zero carbon projects as well, or just general sustainability consulting. And then I also do B Corp consulting and just consulting.
Drew, earlier we were talking about the difference between architecture and sustainable architecture. Tell us more about the distinction between the two.
Yeah, so I think that sustainability is something that, within the profession of architecture it's a core part of what we do. At this point, one of the things that I'm really excited about is the American Institute of Architects has actually said, come out and said, there's a framework for design excellence. And a lot of that framework is drawing on elements of sustainability. And so, we're as a profession, we're redefining what good looks like for us. But I think that a lot of people in the profession of architecture still are challenged by how do I best incorporate sustainability in a project? What if my client tells me no, or if I'm budget constrained or things like that? I think that there's a lot of people who are still trying to figure out the best way to integrate it. And as architects, there's so much we have to do on any given project. It's really hard to get buildings built. And so, layering in sustainability on top of it is a big challenge. I think that for us, sustainability is not something that we add in. It's just our starting point. It's in every decision that we make, from the earliest conversations of a project, or why we may even choose to take a project or do a project in the first place. So it's really kind of changing the dynamic from like, we do architecture that has sustainability in it, to we are sustainable architects from the start.
Beautiful. I would also love to know, because you all are founding B Corp, what was it about the movement that enticed you, so to speak, and what has kept you in the movement so long? Go ahead.
So it's a really good question. And I think that, because we're a mission-driven practice from the very beginning of the founding of our practice, we had this mission to rebalance the relationship between the built and the natural and the social environments. From the beginning, we kind of took this position, which B Corp then came around and said, okay, we have a metric that we can validate with, which was really about the whole idea of stakeholders, not shareholders. That's always been our ethos as a company. And so when B Corp began, it just made so much sense for us, because it's like, all of a sudden, this is the thing that we were talking about. This is the position that we were working from. Along the way, we've just gotten to be more involved with the community and more involved with the evolution of B Corp. It's something that really is a very defining cultural aspect of what we do.
Yeah, and I think it's also a Philly thing. There was a really cool built like big display at the Champions Retreat that was in Philly in 2022 of the sustainability B Corp story in Philly, starting with White Dog Cafe, and kind of how that network has grown and started, and a lot to do with the built environment, a lot to do with the sustainability community. I was drawn to Revision because Revision was always a part of that story, and always really rooted in the Philly sustainability and impact business communities.
I love that angle. Yeah, a lot of our guests have talked about that community, that ecosystem Philly has, where that vision is shared. And to kind of dive into our topic today, I love the way you brought up balance. And oftentimes B Corps are known for balancing purpose and profit. And so I'm really curious to know, sustainability plays a huge role in the certification, especially the environment section. And so I'm curious if you can explain how the B impact assessment really measures that environmental impact of your business.
So the main piece that every B Corp sees when certifying is about their operational environmental impact, right? So we're looking at the impact of the building if you occupy an office, water, energy, et cetera. You're looking at your scope 1 through ideally 3 emissions. You're looking at kind of the operational side of how much waste you produced, et cetera. The other piece is more impact business model type, which I like to describe to folks as the flywheel of your business.
Mm.
So your impact business model and the impact that is created by way of that is the thing that necessarily has to grow as your business grows, right? And so the other piece of the environment section is if you have an impact business model by way of what your business does, the service it provides or the product it creates. So Revision and a lot of the other businesses that I work with have the resource conservation impact business model, which is a really long and fun one with a lot of opportunity. And it basically just asks you to report out on the impact of your projects. So what percentage of your projects, XYZ, are quite energy efficient or saving water or are providing low income housing, et cetera.
I love the way you explain impact business models. That is a complicated topic and you distilled it down phenomenally. So I appreciate that. And for our listeners to understand as well, B Corp certification is for a variety of businesses of different types. And the questions that you'll see in the assessment will actually change depending on the industry you're in. So I know, for example, as an architecture company, there'll be questions about what percentage of your portfolio is LEED certified, things like that. Whereas, if you're a manufacturing business, those things wouldn't apply. But I just love how the B Corp standards are tailored to really try to capture the environmental impact across a wide variety of industries.
Yeah, I want to touch on the B impact assessment for our listeners who don't know. So we refer to it as the BIA, but the B Impact Assessment is a comprehensive tool, and it is free, for measuring a company's overall social and environmental impact. Specifically, the environmental section assesses factors such as carbon footprint, waste management, water usage, supply chain sustainability, and product lifecycle impact. And companies must provide measurable data, or as we say on this podcast, receipts, on these aspects to earn B Corp certification and demonstrate their commitment to continuous improvement. So, from your experience, having gone through certification so many times, were there any sustainable related criteria particularly difficult for you all or enlightening to the company?
Yeah, so I joined Revision right before recertification was due. And as I think many, if there are longstanding B Corps listening, you'll know pulling together a recertification quickly can be hard, and don't recommend it. Definitely like keep at it between recertifications. And I was looking at a couple sections in the environment section that I wanted to try to target in a pretty short period of time. And one of them was the, scope 1 and 2 emissions, and then ideally would get some of the scope 3 in there. And that time around, this wasn't quite enough time to get it together. And then this last recertification, it felt so easy because we had recently gone through LEED Zero Energy and Zero Carbon, LEED O&M. We had kind of put the ongoing operational tracking in place. And so then it was a breeze. And I've encountered that a lot with businesses where, if you try to pull together a scope 1 and 2 really quick, it's really hard. If you get it tracking over time and really commit to it, then all of a sudden recertification comes around. It's super easy. The other thing is the resource conservation impact business model. That one's all about tracking. And we do so many different types of projects.
Mhm.
And so there's always a little bit of a conversation of an expert going out and kind of assessing someone's house and giving them a report. And it was kind of this short thing, everything from that all the way to, a project we're really proud of that took up the efforts of the entire firm at Fahey at Muhlenberg College. There's so many different scopes of projects we work on. So really honing in and deciding, okay, what constitutes a project? What constitutes complete? What constitutes XYZ? And tracking those things along the way. Again, it was really hard the first time we did it. And then this is now something I meet with all of our project managers at regular intervals and keep it updated over time. So when that recertification comes, it's a breeze.
I love that. Yeah.
I would agree. I mean, I think that our biggest challenge, when, yeah, as Shawn was mentioning, this recertification, that when she first came to the company, it was all about data management, right? And I remember having a multi-hour workshop where we had multiple people from the company, and Shawn was interviewing us about project after project. Did you do any energy modeling on this one? Did you do water balance calculations? Because it's the kind of stuff that we're always doing things on our projects, but we're not always logging them somewhere. And so I think that this idea of coming up with systems that are easy to support and to constantly look at your work through that lens, it had two effects. One, we knew our work a whole lot better afterwards, and we could see that kind of impact across the board of what we were doing. But I think it's also put the framework in place. So now when we start a project, we're thinking about these things all the time and not just in the normal flow of what we might be doing on that project.
I love that. I feel like oftentimes folks are so overwhelmed with that data piece. And it's great to hear that even for a founding B Corp like y'all, this is not something you just wake up and are good at. You have to be very intentional. You put in the work and you start to figure it out. And I really loved hearing the impacts that's had on your ability to understand your business much more intimately and know, okay, here's where we drawn that line in the sand. What does it look like next year? How do we know we're tracking in the way we want to go? And Shawn, you also mentioned y'all have a lot of projects. There are tons of opportunities. There's always impact to be had. I think architecture is a really interesting industry because there's so many folks you're touching, right? Not just the folks who are building it, but then the folks who are utilizing it, the neighbors, the community, all of that. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how do you prioritize which changes to invest in as a company when you're deciding, is it this impact business model we want to invest in gathering the data? Do we want to do something completely new? Would love to hear how you kind of go about prioritizing which projects or work streams to invest in.
It's a good question. I mean, there was a big push when I first joined, that was basically what we just discussed of data management, just tracking things. That was definitely a big push a couple years ago. We got a Just label in 2021, and that was another kind of instigator of some more internal, more kind of like employee manual type stuff. And then, yeah, where are we going next? I think
I think one of the we talk about this a lot because we do a lot of certification work. And some people look at certifications as validation. That's what they want out of it, right? They're like, I already know I'm green and sustainable. I just need this certification to prove it, right? I think that in the best case, you can look at it at any sort of certification that you go through as a process that helps guide you forward. And I think that that's something that as I became an owner at Revision and started to get into, how B Corp relates to us in terms of our business practices, that was the great part about it, is it helps to push us forward. And Shawn and I talk about it a lot. Like it's one of the cool parts about being a small business is how agile we can be, because we can literally be sitting there and looking at like one little section in whatever it is, in B Corp, and make a decision, right? Like it's so easy in a small business to be agile like that because we don't have layers of management that we have to run things through. And so we can really experiment with stuff too, it helps us, as a company, we're really invested in continual improvement of ourselves and of our projects, our staff. And so it really just helps us to kind of know, how to move forward in a good way.
Yeah, Shawn, you and I were talking about certification and the many avenues in which you can basically verify yourself. We were talking about just and lead. So, talk to me or talk to our listeners really about knowing what certifications to go for, how they can work in tandem with each other, and what differentiates B Corp certification from some of the others that you've obtained.
I think the main distinction between a lot of these is some of these are for companies, some of these are for buildings. And a lot of the times, I think with the building ones, the certification is the goal, and you kind of work towards that certification. And in the case of lead, for the most part, you're getting that certification once, you're doing it, it's a one-time thing, but you're kind of designing towards this, aspirational certification. Um, and then with some of the other kind of business, or if you're looking at your own building, and what that means for your business type of certification, we have a Just label, which is a little more focused and kind of for the industry that we're in. And B Corp is, much more broad and touches a lot more topics and is, more rigorous and a little bit more of a household name as well. And so I think in, evaluating certainly the difference between B Corp and Just, and if you want to get, certification for, lead operations and maintenance certification or something for your building, there's enough difference with rigor and have you gotten one certification or no certifications before? There's certainly avenues that I would recommend to, first timers versus like, oh, we like really know what we're talking about and we're super, super committed and we're willing to change a lot or willing to, you know, really verify a lot. So it's really, I think, about the first thing I try to look at is what the appetite is for effort, yeah, and time commitment and costs and all those good things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whenever we're working with any kind of client, whether it's a building project, a design project, or if we're working with an organization, it's really trying to align whatever the certification is with their values and trying to understand what will be meaningful to them, because it's a big effort. It takes a lot of work. It takes time. It takes money to pursue a certification, and it's got to be beneficial on the back end of it. And so it's really trying to find that right kind of alignment. We test things on ourselves too, right? So it's like we know that if we're going to be going out and working with folks on their B Corp certifications, right? Like we test it on ourselves first. We come up with the tools. We go through we look at our own building through the lens of lead, to try and understand what it really means to put this stuff into practice and not just be, an abstract consultant on it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Shawn, from your perspective, what do companies struggle with the most when they're going through certification?
That's such a good question, but I think there's there's a lot of vulnerability, especially if you hire an outside consultant. There's a lot of vulnerability in like sitting down with someone and being honest and showing the receipts and answering the, well, when was the last time you did an employee survey? What were the results? Can you share them with me? Let's make sure that you have the right thing in your founding documents, and maybe going through the legal requirement and making that change can be a big hurdle for companies. So there's a kind of vulnerability aspect to it that is always a little bit of a I try to kind of coach folks through in the beginning. Once we get past that and we're, more comfortable with each other and they're more comfortable with the process, then it's really prioritizing, okay, we've found that all else the same, nothing changing about our business. We're at an 80 or we're at a 75. And then prioritizing projects or initiatives that will get them to, a higher goal, whether the goal, and trying to figure out what that goal is. Is it 85? Is it 90? Is it 100? Prioritizing those projects and then, perhaps making a big change in their business. That's always hard. So I would say that's kind of the few stages of difficulty.
And I like how you talked about vulnerability and trust. I think that's a really important component of, folks can be intimidated when there is a performance requirement behind a standard, right? Like not all of the things we were mentioning earlier, just and lead, have that, bar that you have to surpass to then enter the community. And I feel like oftentimes, right, it's like, oh, I have to be perfect. I have to have it all together. And B Corp is really about, acknowledging that no business is perfect. You just have to want to have that dream and that passion to do better. And I think there's the other interesting component of being an entrepreneur, especially a purpose-driven one. Like you got to dream big, right? You got to have that dream of fusing sustainability and architecture in a way that's just core to who you are. And whenever I'm talking to entrepreneurs who want to do this, I always try to bring them back to that initial dream, that initial vision, like what motivated them from the start. Because then you realize, it was just a dream and now here you are making it happen. And so B Corp can then be that framework or that scaffolding to help you go a little bit deeper and really live that vision you had. And mad respect for all of the entrepreneurs out there who go out and make their dreams reality. And for revision specifically, I'm curious if y'all could share any examples about changes you've made because of the B Corp certification process specifically. So, how have the standards really impacted that vision y'all have had as a company?
Yeah, so I think we have a really good one that's kind of like top of mind because it's fairly recent. We had an experience where a client came to us for a project and we weren't sure about them, right? We were like, we're not sure if this is the right thing for us. And it was really good to kind of step back and look at it through the lens of B Corp to say like, how can we take the values of our certification and align this, right? And understand this isn't the right client for us. And I think it's a really, it's both I think that, for Shawn and I, we went through a lot at this moment, right? Where we were kind of realizing like this is really putting it into practice when we can, and it's both like, it's a really empowering moment when you can say, no, we're not going to do this work because even though we want it, right? Like we could use that project, right? But it really was the first like moment where we were like, this helps us, it empowers us to make decisions for this company that align with our values, that align with the things that we've put out there that define us. And so coming out of that experience, we created a vetting system for our clients that we are using day in and day out as we're looking at new projects and meeting people and interviewing them for work. And so I think it's been a really powerful tool for us to think about, this question of who benefits from our work.
I would love to know if that type of approach also carries with balancing your sustainability goals and the business of reality. So say like cost or supply chain, does that still apply?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're always looking at, I mean, to answer the question about how this relates to sustainability, we're not dogmatic about sustainability. It's not like every project doesn't have to be net zero energy. Every project doesn't have to be a Living Building Challenge certified project. We've always kind of maintained that sustainability is this big wide spectrum, and we'll meet clients and projects where they are and then pull them forward in a comfortable way. We can't do it too hard so they snap. And so we've kind of always looked at sustainability as something that we can work with anybody on. But I think that layering in B Corp to this conversation it really changes a lot in terms of thinking about who we work with.
Yeah.
And I think it's been really good for us to have open discourse as a company about this, and how B Corp aligns with our own internal values as people. So it's been a really, really great experience to see it change us in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Shawn, you've worked with many companies helping them through B Corp certification. I'm curious to know from your perspective, how have you seen the environmental section of the BIA specifically evolve over time?
I think my main thought on this one actually aligns, I think, broader to how we've seen corporate sustainability evolve over the last couple of years. It felt like for a while when I first was interacting with the environment section that tracking your scope one, two, sometimes three emissions was like a non-starter for most businesses of like, I don't even know where I would begin. Like, what do you mean? Well, do we have to do a commute survey? How would we even do that? There's so many more frameworks for that now. And you can kind of, depending on the size of the business, obviously you can't do it for quite a large business, but you can kind of accurately back of the napkin it sometimes. And it doesn't have to be this like, really scary, super rigorous thing. If you have your receipts and are, checking your calculations with some kind of accepted standard, you can totally do it in a Google Sheet. And so I think it's not necessarily a change in the section, but a change in, I think, how companies approach tracking their, scope 1 through 3 emissions. And sometimes like, a small business in the very, beginning stages, seeing it in a Google spreadsheet and seeing, oh, wasn't actually that scary. Like I can kind of understand it now. Oh, maybe we'll even go, buy some carbon offsets for that because it's not so scary. Just seeing that development over the last few years has been great, and I feel like companies are coming back to it and saying, okay, now maybe we want to really invest in a carbon tracking platform and get more granular and incorporate in more of our scope 3 and really get more specific about it.
I like that, and I think it speaks to, like, the next evolution of the B Corp standards and really how, we wanna make sure folks know what are those best-in-class frameworks, methodologies, tools that are available to you as an entrepreneur and a business leader, because there's a lot out there. It can be very overwhelming to pick that one and know, is it right? So I'm really excited that with the launch of our new standards, B Lab will be out there saying, "Here are some credible ones that you can use to do that work," so it's not so scary to take that first step, because I agree, perfection is the enemy of progress, and it's really about taking that first step and making mistakes along the way.
Yeah, there really is something in showing someone who is really not interested in the scopes, just saying like, all right, let's do a quick hypothetical
Yep.
in this Excel here and see how it adds up. And it's not all that scary. It's just, we're just adding stuff up.
Yep. And then, so I'm curious, we talked a lot about scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, but are there any other sustainability metrics or best practices that have emerged in recent years that B Corps need to consider, that you see B Corps or folks who want to become certified considering?
That's a good question. I think sustainability is really all about, and tracking and metrics are really all about that first decision of how far away from the things I touch every day am I considering? And obviously we've been talking about our scopes here, but I think when we get really specific about, okay, well, I had to buy this piece for this thing and, all the way down the supply chain is XYZ. When we start to, I think, over focus on trying to track every little moment of a life cycle, sometimes we miss the really big stuff. And I think that I was really encouraged to see in the new standards, the government and collective action section, is that what it's called? Because that's touching on some of the really big opportunity there is to move as a collective movement. And perhaps there will be lots of work to one fell swoop, some big policy that has more carbon impact than, tracking down to a super granular level and making, tweaking adjustments could ever make, right? And so, this is a little bit of a non-answer, but I'm excited for a sustainability world and a B Corp world that knows that, yeah, we're responsible for our own emissions and metrics. And also when we move together, our scale and our level of impact is orders of magnitude larger.
I love how you brought collective action in as that metric. I think that's a really awesome and inspiring piece. And yeah, the US and Canada is pretty far behind when it comes to regulation and policy. And so I really think, there's a lot of opportunity for the B Corp movement to lead a lot of these collective action efforts. So I really like that answer, even though you didn't fully answer it. I think you still did answer it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the efforts, the intentionality, the decision making, but how does that translate? How do we bring it into reality? What does the tangibility of all of these efforts look like when it comes to measuring your environmental benefits?
I think it's really interesting. I feel like when we did our big effort of trying to track all of our projects and the impact, of each of our projects and kind of saying, okay, these projects did this, these projects didn't. Something that was, I feel like I had a little bit of a paradoxical realization about was the number at the end of the day, when you add everything up, felt less impactful than the people who have come back to us and said, you changed how I think about the world. You changed how I move through my day to day. And so the impact at the end of the day is we'll never be able to measure because it sits within, our clients and our final users of projects. And, I think about all the kids who will learn in buildings that we've designed and helped with LEED certification on, what are they then going to go on to do? And we'll never be able to measure that because we'll never fully know.
Yeah. And that's my favorite type of data is the ones that you can't measure, you can't really see, but you can feel.
Yeah.
And that they are sustainable and very long term. So I love that you mentioned that.
I think it's also like one of the things that I personally enjoy about working in the sustainability movement is that it's under constant evolution. And so it's like what we think is the impact one day is not like we find out about something else next after that. And so it's one of those things that it's really interesting because, we'll be focused one day on like air leakage in our buildings and how much energy we're losing. But then the next day we'll be talking about, human rights in our supply chain or sequestering carbon in meadows, right? And so it's one of the things that's really cool is like we can find impact in different areas. They're all meaningful in different ways.
And I'm curious if there were any unexpected opportunities that came up as y'all were doing this. You were touching on the fact that, there's a lot of these angles. Obviously, your business is very focused on that environmental impact. But were there anything that kind of like came out of nowhere where you're like, didn't think of that, another way to kind of be more environmentally friendly or sustainability minded?
That's a really
I mean,
good question.
I think revision has taught me so much about building sustainably. To state the obvious, and all of the specific ways that you can do that, and deep understanding of how to build a tight envelope. The amazing California corner moment we had looking at the that one project. Because I don't come from a super technical background, so I've learned a lot of that. Recently, but something that has really been a theme throughout our work more recently is how do we bring our kind of technical sustainability knowledge and technical green building, high efficiency, high performance knowledge to as many people as possible and really focusing on that human and social impact. Because that, I think, for a long time in the sustainability and environmental movement, that was really overlooked. We're building a more environmentally friendly world, but for whom? And I feel like that's a question we've really thought about a lot.
Yeah, I would also add to this is that, I just think that from a business operations standpoint, in terms of like how we do things, I think one of the key benefits of, having something like B Corp is that it doesn't allow us to stand still. What we might, rest on our laurels is like, oh yeah, this is great because this is the way we've always done it. And we found out that it was great a really long time ago. So we just kept doing it, right? It kind of knocks us out of that inertia and kind of forces us in a good way to really confront what doing business in a world that's constantly changing means. And so I think that's something that I'm really grateful for about having something like B Corp that we operate under it keeps us out of that inertia state, and it keeps us on our toes. I feel like we're constantly learning about, even here we are 22, 23 years in as a company. We're not like like a startup at this point, and we're still learning day in and day out about how to do this better and how to track our impact better and how to be more impactful and be better to our clients and to the communities they serve and to our people, our staff, our community. So it's one of those things that it really shapes, how we move forward.
Yes. Speaking of people, when we talk about people and communities and consumers, what role do they play in driving sustainability, specifically in the architecture space?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have this conversation with people a lot because it's like, why should I care about something like LEED, or why should I care about living building challenge? And we always say, like, if you ever go in a building, if you ever like live in a building, like you should care about this, right? Like people don't realize it, but you spend 90% of your day indoors inside buildings. And so the decisions that we make around the built environment, not just buildings, the full built environment, they do matter. And I think it's one of those things where, going back to something that I said earlier, it's really about aligning sustainable decisions with your values as a organization or a business or a person. When it becomes something that's not externally driven, like I have to do this for this kind of compliance, when it becomes something that's more like attached to your personal values, then it's something fun and meaningful as opposed to something that somebody else is telling you you have to do. So being able to draw a connection between, like, okay, like I love being out in nature, and by using something that is a salvage material, I'm preserving nature because I'm not taking something else from it, right? The more that you can kind of connect back to what matters to individuals, like that's the real way to kind of implement this stuff. And it's fun and meaningful in the process.
Yeah.
And I love that angle from the consumer. And I'm curious, how do you approach that same discussion when you're talking to your suppliers or your partners? Like y'all embrace that, but how do you find those folks you want to work with? Or how do you maybe motivate them to adopt that spirit of continuous improvement that y'all have really adopted?
We get them in a lunch and learn and grill them.
Oh my God. Like people come in to like talk to our firm and they don't know what they're getting into, right? Because it's like we don't have one sustainability person, right? Like we don't have like that one person who sits in the corner and asks questions. It's everybody. And so, we're kind of like unapologetic about it too, where it's like we're gonna ask you hard questions. Like it was really great. We had somebody in the company the other day, one of our younger staff people who, they were on the phone with a brick supplier who cold called us. And this person on our staff started asking them, like, have you looked at your supply chain? Do you know like where the materials for your bricks are coming from? Do you know if there are human rights issues at play there? And it was just one of those moments that was really wonderful for us, because these are the conversations that we have internally. And when our staff starts to take those things and advocate when they're not asked, right? Like they're not asked by a client, or it's not like their project team is asking them to do something like that. When they just go out and say, this is what I know is important, and so I have an opportunity, I'm going to push on it. It makes people uncomfortable for sure. But there are the hard conversations that we need to have. So, we don't shy away from it.
Shout out to Design for Freedom.
Yes.
Farms. We did a little internal learning on that, and that's, I think, ultimately where
That's
how we
ultimately where
felt
it came
empowered
from.
to
Yeah. I mean, that's so much a part of it is, the more that we create a safe space for people to explore sustainability, it's where they don't have to feel like they have to do it, while their boss isn't watching, right, on their projects, right? And we were like, yeah, we want you to do this. We want you to go out and push on something or run with it or advocate. That's where, we start to see the exciting things happen.
Yeah, it sounds like you all have a lot of buy-in from your employees at Revision, but I'm curious to know if being a certified B Corp is a recruitment tool for talent, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, I think that when oh, wow, we could talk about recruitment for a while, couldn't we, Shawn?
Yeah.
We're very upfront in our, so on the recruitment side of it, we're very upfront. Every time that we put out a job posting, it mentions B Corp,
Okay.
right? And it links back to our website about our, what B Corp is and what our certification is like. We put it out there front and center, We're very proud of it. And I am increasingly impressed by just how many applicants respond to us asking about it, where they say like, yeah, I was so interested because you guys are a B Corp. That's really cool. That differentiates you. So we do find it really a major market differentiator. And we're a small firm, right? We're a small business, and we have to compete in a world of big business. And so, anything that helps us get noticed or helps to differentiate us among people who are looking for a place to work is critical. And I think that especially with younger applicants, there's a greater appetite than ever to align their values with where they work, right? And so if they're feeling this way and they see that we put ourselves out there this way, that's a good kind of first moment to have with somebody.
And on that topic of trying to adapt to a rapidly changing market and innovate, I'm curious, where do you see the future of sustainable business practices, and as well as in the architecture and consulting industry heading?
I think that in general, right, we're coming out of an emerging phase of sustainable business where people say, I'm a sustainable business, right? To I have gone through a certification that validates that I'm a sustainable business. And so I think that's the really key thing that if you were to ask me, like, what's the future of this? I think it is putting that level of validation behind it, because anyone can say like, yeah, we're sustainable, but to go through something as rigorous as B Corp, I think is the key here. And I think that as more and more businesses kind of get involved with the B Corp movement, it's going to be something that, it's going to be that thing that is the thing that demonstrates that. I mean, we saw that with LEED, right? With buildings. And so, in the very beginning, LEED was this kind of fringy thing. But now I think, to be able to say like, yes, we're a sustainable building, people are looking for it, right? They want to hear that. They want to see that you went through that certification to match your claims about sustainability. So from a business side, yeah, definitely. I think that's where we're headed.
I love that. Yeah. Consumers, employees, everyone really diving a lot deeper, doing their homework, not taking claims at face value. I think that's really what we see in the data of, who's interested in B Corp, who knows about it, who are looking to work for B Corps. And I'm really excited for what the next generation is going to bring in, that passion they have for kind of making sure they are, putting their money where their values are at the end of the day.
And if you're looking to work someplace, it's not just your money, it's you're putting your work someplace, right? Like we all have a limited amount of time to give, a limited number of years to give, right? And if you want to make an impact, going to work for a B Corp means a lot, right? It kind
Right. 90% of your time is spent in a building, 30% is at work, might as well try to create all of those overlaps. I love that.
And boy, aren't I lucky to work for a B Corp in a LEED certified building.
Yeah, y'all both seem very happy, balanced.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Shawn, earlier you talked about incorporating policy into the movement growing and remaining sustainable. This might be a dream shot question, but if you could have one significant policy change in your industry to promote sustainability, what would it be?
This might seem kind of nerdy and not exciting, but every building over a certain square footage, major renovation or new, has to be LEED silver, LEED gold. Pick one. Right now, we need the industry to get used to this way of doing things. And the only way that happens is, when I join a kickoff meeting and say, hey, who's worked on a LEED building before? It needs to be every single person in the room. And right now it's, it's maybe sometimes it's half, but it needs to be every single person, and every single, firm that builds anything must, know how to do this and do it efficiently and well as just part of their business and their operations.
Yeah. Drew, Shawn, I thank you so much for joining us. Before we let you go, let our listeners know where they can find you.
Oh, you can find us on our website. It's www.revisionarch.com.
All right.
Yeah, come check us out.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you are interested in learning more about a B Corp, want to use our free tool to measure your impact, the B Impact Assessment, visit wearebcorps.com, and we will see you next time. Bye, y'all.